Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the High Court case against the Metropolitan Police brought by a group of women really involved in the Sarah Everard peaceful vigil. The group won their case and the court has agreed that the police acted outside the law in attacking these women on the streets and had not given due consideration to their human rights. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So almost 1 year ago to the day, I really should have done this on the anniversary, I suppose, a group of people took part in a peaceful vigil in the memory of Sarah Everard, who was murdered not only by a serving police officer, but someone who used his position as a serving police officer in order to commit the crime. There had been a number of people, largely women, taking part in some form or other in an event all day. That included the Duchess of Cambridge. But in the evening, a silent vigil was held. I wasn't there, but it seemed quite clear from footage and photos that it was a dignified, considerate protest. The police took the view that COVID restrictions prevented such gatherings, which in theory they did, even outdoors, and they broke it up. Now, for context, it has to be said that a large anti-lockdown group protested in London in the same month, and the police did not stop them. This took place 1 week after police broke up the Sarah Everard vigil. So immediately the police were not acting consistently, because you can't even try and say that maybe one protest was more responsible than the other, because the vigil took place at night. It was reasonably distanced. It did not impede any of the small number of people who have been out for other reasons. The anti-lockdown protest, however, which wasn't in itself a problem as far as I can recall, under normal circumstances anyway, nonetheless took place in daylight, blocked streets, absolutely interfered with other people. So if the latter protest was fine, and I'm not saying it wasn't, but if the latter protest was fine, then the vigil absolutely was. Now, people will interpret this inconsistency in different ways. I've seen some suggesting that the vigil was broken up because it was essentially women. I don't necessarily think that's the most likely scenario, given that both the Home Secretary and the head of the Met Police are also women. Not that either has ever helped deal with the disproportionate level of violence against women in our society, but still, I think it's more likely to be as simple as anti-lockdown protesters, more likely to be Conservative voters. We don't want to annoy them. And you know, we'll not harass them because, you know, they vote for us. And vigil attendees, much less likely to be Conservative voters, so fair game. This is ultimately why I think the Conservative MPs were happy to vote for the policing bill, which will break up peaceful protests and imprison people for up to 10 years for just standing there holding a sign, doing nothing more than making their voices heard. In fact, they don't even have to say anything, just hold up a sign. Priti Patel can't even complain about the annoying level of noise here either, because it was a silent vigil. But Tories would not have voted through such draconian police powers if they thought they would be consistently applied. It's because they know that they will not be that they did. They will be used to break up what they see as woke or leftist protests. So racial or sexual equality protests, maybe trans-related protests, protests against the Conservative government in general, protests against climate change, protests against yet another police officer being allowed to murder an innocent woman. And I mean allowed, because the murderer didn't just happen to be a police officer, didn't just happen to be a police officer that abused their position as a police officer. The murderer was known to his colleagues as a man who represented a very specific threat to women. Actual police officers knew that this person represented that specific threat to the public and did nothing. And this is part of the reason why MPs have described the Metropolitan Police as institutionally corrupt. I'm absolutely certain that most officers are good people who see their job as an essential service and intend to serve the community every time they put their uniform on. And they may feel, understandably, personally attacked when we talk of police brutality and institutional corruption, because they're laying their lives on the line at times, trying to do their best for their community, and they think it's unfair aspersions cast on them, as if they're all as bad as each other. But here's the thing. The reason the Met are considered institutionally corrupt is not because there are some bad apples. It's because the good ones don't call them out. If you allow vile law-breaking police officers to remain police officers when you know what they're like, you cannot then complain when people see the force closing ranks on their bad apples and conclude that the entire force is against them. You know, at the weekend, I saw a report that someone was protesting in Moscow and was arrested. Nothing new there, you may say, but this protester didn't even seem to be saying anything. They had a placard. Yeah, that's enough to arrest you in Moscow now. The placard was blank, completely blank. You would have to infer for yourself what they were even standing up for. Doesn't matter now. Moscow police are just told to arrest anyone who is making their voice heard at all on any issue. And police, you know, people, in Britain, you know, they'll look at reports like that in Moscow and they'll stroke their chin and say, yes, yes, this is a despotic society in action here, without considering that the same law that arrested that protester has been implemented by our government in the UK. But this vigil took place before any new laws had been put in place to prevent peaceful protests. A group naming themselves Reclaim the Streets took the police to court. The claim was that although the gathering did contravene the restrictions at the time, no one's denying that, absolutely, yeah, clear as day, but they are arguing that the police did not factor in the rights to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. And it's worth pointing out here, you do sometimes have a situation where it seems there's a clear breach of a particular law. This is why it's very important when you're looking at legislation to consider what a legal expert will say on the matter. Because anyone can look at a piece of legislation, oh yeah, absolutely clear as day. But someone can then show you, but then look at this piece of legislation, it's like, oh yeah, now there's uncertainty. Because another law can provide a reasonable exception to that law. And such was the argument here. And the judge agreed. Curiously, part of the judgment includes a section where it says the defendant, which is the Commissioner of the Met Police, argued that all her officers did was to point out the legal restrictions on gatherings. What's this photo about then? That doesn't look to me like the police were simply explaining the restrictions to the group to me. But the upshot is that the court has decided that the Met Police failed to engage with the vigil organisers because they were willing to talk to the police and organise it and make sure that it was all fine. The police said, no, we're not having anything to do with it. Refused to engage with them. And they failed to consider the reasonable excuse in the restrictions. Basically, the police acted unlawfully. And make no mistake, you know, it was a judgment against the police in black and white, but it wasn't really. This is the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary, we know, was in close discussion with the police over the affair before that event took place. So she was in close contact before those officers waded in mob-handed. This is another example of how the government have yet again tried to use the police as their own private gang, you know, their own private army in their own culture wars. And the reason this judgment is important because it represents a warning about where our country is going. Because with the new laws, what would be the legal position now under the same circumstances? Because no reasonable person thought that the police conducted themselves well in breaking up that peaceful vigil last year. After the event, a cross-party group of MPs held an inquiry into the police action and concluded that they'd breached people's fundamental rights. Needless to say, there were some Conservative MPs who attacked the group as partisan, even though it had representatives of all the major parties in it, including their own. But some Conservative MPs did come out publicly to attack the way the protesters were treated. It's one of those classic cases, isn't it, of not all Conservatives defended the injustice, but all of those who did defend it were Conservatives. Read into that what you will. And I'll just finish off by remarking on something that legal commentator David Allen Green said. So obviously he's got a lot of experience of court proceedings. I don't. And he said that it was remarkable that the courts normally nod along to the police's accounts of events. And he said this case had that sort of absence of usual deference to the police version of events, and that the court placed a lot of emphasis on Article 10 of the Human Rights Convention. Now, see, I would look at it not as someone who follows court proceedings, not as a legal expert, and just conclude, well, given that this case was I can understand a court ordinarily, you know, when the police is describing what happened, their own eyewitness account, that the courts will often defer to the police. You assume a level of professionalism amongst the police. I get that. That's okay. But given that this case was specifically about police conduct, not just that the police happened to be witness to something, but it was about the police conduct, the court logically surely had to abandon any automatic deference to the police on this occasion. Also, given that human rights laws were being claimed as a reasonable excuse for contravening other legislation that neither side disagreed with, the court also surely had to logically put a lot of emphasis on that human rights legislation. But like I say, this experienced expert was noting that this is unusual, even given the parameters of the case. So, you know, we have to sort of say, good. The court did actually look at the points carefully. But the end result is that the Met Police have yet again shown how urgently they are in need of reform. You know, they are supposed to protect and serve their community, not, as I say, act as a private army for a corrupt government waging culture wars against the population. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.